Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. I'm Joel Martin. I'm HFS's Chief Research Officer. And today I'm joined by David Cushman. David works with me. He's an executive research leader here at HFS. And we're going to talk about in this webinar what Silicon Valley builds today, enterprises are facing tomorrow. Just some housekeeping. You are muted by default. Chat has been disabled. But we have the Q&A open, and I encourage you to post Q&A throughout the session over the next hour, and I will direct that conversation and flow with David as it comes in. And the deck and recording will be shared on hfsresearch.com after this call is completed. So with that, I'm going to welcome David Cushman. David, how are you?
Joel, thank you for joining me at this early hour for me. I'm in California, which you've mentioned. Actually, amid some really awful weather here right now, which I was not expecting. But I'm in Belmont, if anyone's familiar with the peninsula. And I've been here for the last week or so. I'm going to be spending the next couple of months here on and off. And I've spent quite a lot of time in the last year here in the Valley trying to get under the skin of what's going on, particularly with the AI revolution. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen so you actually see the slides that I'm going to be talking to. And just bear with me 1 second while I vaguely concentrate on that for a moment. I'm hoping that you can now see that's my deck, and I can share it in a full view so that you can see it more effectively. Can I get a thumbs up, Joel, that you are seeing what I'm hoping you see?
You're good.
Excellent.
You're good. You're under the Silicon Valley skin of this deck.
Fantastic. So today we're going to go through, I want to give a little bit of context about the rise of services of software. And I want to very quickly go over why I think the Valley matters so much, why I'm spending so much time here, and why I think you should be paying attention. Then I'll look through a number of emerging tech themes that we're seeing here, from massive genetic systems, vibe coding, vertical AI, the efficiency breakthroughs that I think are going to be incredibly important this year, the rise of physical AI, and AGI. It's becoming hotter and hotter by the moment. I want to go back to some core definitions and understand what it actually means for the enterprise. And finally, I want to look at governing in the new world and try and close what I call the speed trust gap, which is the gap between the rate at which firms are able to ingest innovation and the rate at which innovation is actually happening. Finally, we'll get around to some quick takeaways and some Q&A. And I have said to Joel, if there's interesting stuff to interject with along the way, because I'm conscious that otherwise it's just me talking for a long period, by all means, let's throw those in. But I want to try to keep to our schedule to cover off everything we're trying to do today. So straight into the kind of strategic context here. We've seen a long period of labour arbitrage and improvements in the way that labour arbitrage is applied to creating value in enterprises. And everyone was recognising that that was running out of headroom, and it's been running out of headroom for a little while. And the expectation has been that the next great leap in value comes from technology. So the shift to technology arbitrage, this leap of the S-curve. We've been talking about this here at HFS for 3 years more, seeing this coming, and hopefully you've been planning for it. What it means in practice for us is a shift from technology arbitrage to labour arbitrage. It's written large in the concept of services as software. And right now, we're seeing some very clear signs that the move to services as software is happening. So what we mean by services as software is technology-driven, primarily led by advanced software solutions. Primarily, that's AI, minimal human intervention, it's reducing reliance on human resources, and it becomes very efficient and scalable as a result. So one human can produce a hell of a lot more when they're applying services as software models. So we have been predicting this would be creating a vast emerging new market. 1.5 trillion was the TAM we've assessed for that. And initially we said that would be by 2030, and we have brought that back to 2028. And honestly, it feels like it's just around the corner when I'm sitting in the Valley right now. So we're seeing a lot of growth in particularly AI-led agentic services. And you'll have seen some recent movements such as OpenClaw which has really opened people's eyes as to the art of the possible here and what can be delivered through AI technology without very much human intervention whatsoever. Okay. Now, I have one simple message, one simple measure rather of how to track how you're doing on this journey. And it's really as simple as how much human effort is going on to deliver your outcomes. So that's up the left-hand column there, the humans in the loop, and how much software are you using to do the work. And that's the axis along the bottom. And you'll note that in both cases, I don't go up to 100. So we're not even into spinal tap territory here. There's a 5% gap, I think, that there's going to increasingly be the last 5% of work will still be very human, and the last 5% of control will remain very human. But all the value is going to head there. I think it's interesting. I saw Phil's blog post, I think it was a blog post at least today, about the shifting share prices in India IT, how he's very positive about it. And actually, when you look at this, you can work out why you can be positive about the future of IT services. Because at the moment, they're sitting, if you look at this chart, IT services are sitting around, and the best of IT services is doing around 92,000 revenue per employee. And that's because they haven't yet leaped into this using more software to do work, having less humans in the loop, that we're seeing among the best of the AI natives, where they are routinely delivering 2 million revenue per employee. And I think that just reveals the headroom we all have to go on. So it's not necessarily bad news that your revenue per employee is relatively low today. This is showing where the future goes by adopting more of the services and software model. Okay, so why does the value matter in particular? Because this is a revolution that's going on across the world, right? We're all finding people building with AI, and there's lots of startups emerging, and there's lots of new technology solutions emerging. The difference here, I think, is that in the Valley, there's this amazing coincidence of the location itself, which is just a fertile place for people to do well, and it attracts people from across the world. There's great universities that are very focused on delivering in technology. There's local government that is supportive. The big tech giants are here, so there's kind of a concentration of capability and talent. The AI giants are here, so similar from them. And of course, there's this whole explosion of startups going on. Always was, because of the investors as well. Always was, but it's increasingly now, and I'll come back to why when we look at some of the technology changes, an increasing explosion of startups. One person that I've known who's worked in this area for quite some time and has worked at many, many different companies here, talks about working for Silicon Valley. They see themselves as an employee of Silicon Valley. That's the community aspect of it. And I'll come back a little later to how important that is, because it's the speed at which you see information transmit amongst this community is extraordinary. And the intensity of that community is extraordinary. For example, I could go out any night of the week to almost any town along the peninsula, city as they call them, and I will be able to go to an AI event. There'll be a meetup, there'll be engineers coming together. They're doing that in their evenings, right? They're not doing that as part of their day job. They are investing in themselves to go and learn from each other. And they do it very openly. So the number of AI events in the Valley has been over 4,000 in the last 3 years, and that's only rising. You'll find every night multiple events on here, whereas you go to any other city in the world, you'll be lucky to see 1 or 2 a month, a week, possibly. 40% of the world's unicorns have their home in the Bay Area. So I'm going to use Bay Area and Silicon Valley quite interchangeably. And if you're not familiar with the Bay Area, it's kind of the cities all around the Bay of San Francisco as well. But broadly, think of them as a small area of the United States, a small area of one state in the United States, which has 40% of the world's unicorns in their area. So that's out of 600, right? That's quite an extraordinary number. And then I look at the investment. 67% of VC AI investment has been just in this area. So it's around 135 billion in 2024 versus 65 billion across the rest of the world. So we established that tech is the growth leader. AI is becoming its beating heart. And if anywhere is its home, it's Silicon Valley. Now,
Hey, David, just one
yes,
quick
sir.
question on that. How does that factor against, the growing tech industry in Texas or even China, in the Shanghai area, which are also creating massive
Well,
tech ecosystems?
yeah, I think there's a difference. So everyone tries to replicate the Silicon Valley model over and over again. And Chinese have invested quite heavily in trying to do that. Nowhere has it quite worked yet. Nowhere has the intensity. You look at the figures that I just described, you will not see anything like that for any other city. Even if I look at things like the number of AI jobs just being advertised, the valley is just so far ahead of the next nearest that it's ridiculous. The next nearest is New York, with about 10% of what the valley has. So it gives you an
Interesting.
idea of how big the fat head of this long tail is. And I don't expect that to change rapidly. There are some factors that might in the long run, but I don't expect that to change rapidly. So I'll move on to this idea of why that makes it important to stay close. There's an idea that companies are already lagging in their ability to absorb this rate of innovation. What was described on the right chart here is the operational change speed. And that's just an illustrative number, but it's not unreasonable. So we're looking at around a lag already between what companies are able to ingest and what is already being delivered in terms of the capabilities of AI, in terms of capabilities of the real world proxy of agentic AI. So, and that's only going to open wider. So a year ago, it was okay being a year behind, I think. It was okay. You could be a fast follower. Now, the rate of change is so fast that I'm seriously concerned that you face real competitive disadvantage from not keeping pace with what's going on here, because some companies will. And you will find that in a year, the advances are applied and you have a compounding capability that increases the gap between those who adopt and those who don't. Little things like the falling cost of querying a top tier AI in 18 months has fallen by 280 times. So actually, the token cost effectively has fallen 280 times. Anyone who's gone and tried an experiment in AI 6 months ago and is telling you things won't work needs to go back and try again. Honestly, the new capabilities that are becoming available by the day are making any kind of lag really dangerous. We're now seeing 1 million step agents for real work. Those are real and out in the wild. The open source models are catching up. We've seen that consistently. So you're getting a kind of what's good enough to work in any organization is becoming available more broadly than it was even a short period ago. And even if you're going for the best in breed thing, the best in breed is rarely at the top for long. You could argue that Google had the best capability in November. You could argue that OpenAI had the best in December, and Anthropic has it in January. It's a matter of time until another one leaps those. It's going to be every month. There's going to be another leader in best in breed. So keeping up with that rate of change becomes incredibly important for your business. Just some quick takeaways on what I think it means for you is, one, the pace of improvement emphasizes the need to avoid long-term vendor locking. You've got to select safe and productive LLMs. We'll come back to that in a moment. Contracting is changing. So we've established the AI Deal Lab because firms don't know how to buy AI. And we recognize that they need to find a balance between flexibility and predictability. And we also recognize that we didn't know how to buy AI. So the idea of the lab is that we work together to find our way through this changing world to establish new ways of contracting in the future. I think another really important aspect is that both tech and business architectures must become more modular in design and be ready for low friction when swapping elements in and out, because ultimately we're in this new age of impermanence. where I hate to say change is the new normal because that's a little bit cliche. We've been saying this for decades, right? But this impermanence is about things like, and I'll come to this later with vibe coding, the idea that software has been structural up to this point. It's been something you build once. Now we're moving to an age of software being situational, where you build it for the moment, for the need, for the requirement right now, and you actually plan for it to have an end of life pretty quickly because you no longer need it anymore and you move it on to the next situation. That's because code's got so cheap, but we'll go back to that. I just want to say we've got this paper that you can look at for understanding what you should look for in an LLM, in your enterprise LLM. There's a framework for safe and productive LLMs. That's available on our website to download. It comes with a framework for making those selections and who should be responsible for what in there. You may find that quite useful. Okay, so I'm going to move on to taking a sip of water and a breath. And I want to talk about some of the emerging tech trends that we've been seeing. And the first is multi-agent systems. So about a year or more ago, I came across a company here called Double O, and we invited them to present at our event in New York, at the New York Summit. And what interested me about them was that they were adopting agents. This was a year or more ago as part of how they did their work. And to the extent that they had job descriptions for each of their human beings who said, thou shalt manage agents. And I thought that was interesting. The Valley adopted that kind of working, agents as co-workers, instantly. And it's allowed startups to scale much faster. In fact, Double O's already exited. The journey from primitive, i.e. the idea of the technology itself, to an enterprise-grade application of it, required some new solutions such as MCP. And I was mentioning earlier the intensity of the collaborative nature of the community here. When I first came out here, I went to, literally, I think it was the first night, I went into an engineers meetup, and it was relatively small. And the guy at the front asked the question of the room, who's heard of MCP? And I think one hand went up. By the end of that same week, I was at a much larger event, and the guy at the front asked the question, who's heard of MCP? And every hand in the room went up. And I think that illustrates the speed at which this kind of newness, the new stuff that's going to be valuable and important for us, spreads in this particular part of the world and why it's worth paying attention to. Also, the rate at which primitives move from the original engineering solution to an enterprise solution has shortened. And my little proxy for that is, if I drive along the 101, which is the main highway along the peninsula, there's loads of adverts. The adverts are all for AI companies, right? This is not a place where you see adverts for Coca-Cola and Nike. It's all for AI companies. And there's a cycle. The adverts are for engineers. So the initial adverts will be about agents are great, right? Try our agents. And then over a period of time, they convert to being adverts for enterprise applications of those things. And that cycle is speeding up. It was about 18 months for generative AI. It's been a year for agents. And in vibe coding, it's happened in 6 months. So whatever is next, I expect to move from the idea of primitive to entertain engineers through to an actual application for the enterprise in a very short period of time. I think one of the things that tells us is that the Valley is taking enterprise much more seriously than it might have done in the past. It used to be very, very focused on consumer. I think they've now worked out they need to make money out of enterprise too, to give some of the bills coming in on AI. So we've seen even in the use of multi-agent systems, that's ramped up really fast. That's gone from agents could just about work a year ago to now they're being deployed in multi-agent systems in enterprises. And we've got data as part of a report coming out at the end of the month that shows that the leaders in this space, those that are having some which are successful. Are averaging 12 agents in production in each deployment. So we've moved quite quickly from just playing with agents to actually delivering end-to-end outcomes with agents in multi-agent systems. So I mentioned these primitives flowing through at an increasing pace, so I won't go over that again. But I think you need to consider how workflow and org charts operate in the context of people working with agents. This is going to become very, very normal very quickly. Also, don't fall into the productivity trap. We've been banging this drum since we came across generative AI. It's a risk if all you do is look at how you're going to improve productivity with any of these technologies. And all of the CEOs I speak to here who are talking regularly with enterprise boards find that the conversation about efficiency in terms of I'm going to cut some heads, isn't that great? They're just not interested in it. They're actually interested in what can you help me grow? Where am I going to increase my revenues? And that's a very different place than I think we saw even a year ago with AI. There is now a broad understanding that the value, particularly to the board, is growth, nothing else. Finally, I think you have to think beyond just you're going to build some agents to you're going to build an agent operating system. And this paper that's referenced here is going to be out at the end of this month and has your guide to how to build an agent operating system. So please do stay close to us on that if that is something you're interested in. All right, so moving on to vibe coding. So vibe coding is rampant in the Valley, but in most enterprises, it's dormant. We don't have a lot of take-up so far because there's all sorts of fears associated with it. But we think it's a very important part of the mix. In fact, we regard it as the engine, if you like, or the production engine that makes services as software real. So in our services as software flywheel, agentic AI is managing workflows, LLMs are providing the reasoning, and vibe coding turns intent into working service agents. So it's going to deliver great productivity uplifts, but you have to develop AI native talent and redesign leadership behaviors to enable decentralized innovation. We've been doing some research with around 100 leaders in the UK and Ireland that has showed us that the realization is we do need to change our culture in order to embrace vibe coding because of the fear aspect of it. And that means actually you're going to have to bring in some new thinking. And that new thinking comes with AI natives and early stage technology leaders. And that there is broad recognition that that's the case. I'm encouraged, for example, by IBM recently announcing that it's going to triple the number of early stage professionals that it's going to bring into its organization. I think there's been a period in which those guys have had a really hard time with the jobs market. And vibe coding reveals you've got to culturally update in order to be able to embrace the technology that's now available. Now, the leaders in this space, firms such as Cursor, that are based in San Francisco, and Replit in Foster City, have seen extraordinary growth. So if you're not using vibe coding, there's a lot of folk that are, right? And here's the evidence. Replit's growth since the launch of its vibe coding agent is 10 times. And they're now one of the firms doing 2 million of revenue per employee. Cursor's doing revenue per employee of 6 million. And it's doubling every 2 months. So if you think no one's joining in, you're wrong. And also, we saw Cognizant, one of the world's largest GSIs, setting a world record using vibe coding. It got so many of its people involved in a vibe coding weekend, basically a hackathon, getting people to try it and learn from it. And I think it is so significant when people try things for themselves, how much they learn about the art of the possible. We got this set of learnings from the survey that I mentioned. Most firms aren't culturally and organizationally ready for vibe coding, but digital savvy grads and early career technologists might hold the key. And it is a cultural drag that's slowing down adoption. Like I say, if you go out into startups across this part of the world, everyone's embracing it. You've got to ask yourself why you're not. Leaders need to set some clear rules. So the biggest problem, the biggest thing that people are going, oh, I'm not sure we should get on with this, and that's because the contract hasn't changed yet, it is blockers from legal, security, and compliance functions. So the response to that must be very clear about what can and can't be done. So you free people to be able to make their experiments, test and learn, and get into the productivity boost that's coming. That productivity thing remains a challenge. I mentioned it before. Most people are still focused on that with vibe coding, but transformation is going to be better, and that's more to the flywheel that I referenced on the previous slide. This is about improving your capabilities as an organization and not just doing the next thing quickly. So embrace the latter if you're going to create real value. And finally, yeah, our data shows that Cursor remains king. Despite the rise of the likes of Lovable and Replit, it's Cursor that's the current de facto choice in enterprises for vibe coding where it's being used. I think another thing we've got to be conscious of is that I mentioned the culture thing, and I do feel we're at the edge of a new culture. I've mentioned this impermanence idea before. Yeah, this is where software as structure is being, it's still going to be important, but it's going to be a much smaller part of what companies do. So software for the moment and for the need is going to be the majority of software that's being developed in organizations, and it's not there for the long run. And there's an interesting company I've come across out here called Prompt-Driven. They're already working with Google on their code. And they argue that vibe coding doesn't need to be perfect or future-proof or endlessly maintainable. It's all the things to worry about. They reject all that because they think of it in terms of clothes. Clothes have got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So very few people are repairing their clothes these days. Very few people don their socks, if anyone's still familiar with that term, right? So the reason we don't do that is it's so cheap now. Hey, Joel, did you want to say something? I see your lips moving, but I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I was going to say one other interesting thing that business folks need to think about when it comes to vibe coding is you're seeing all this activity around Anthropic and OpenAI invest heavily in coding. One of the reasons for that is goes back to your flywheel. As AI can code, it can also start coding and improving itself. So going back to your human in the loop chart you also showed, what you're seeing is as coding improves, as AI can improve its own coding, it further increases the speed of that flywheel for both itself and its human counterparts. So that from an enterprise perspective, I think that's critical to see how this also fits into your strategy and your strategy working with partners on how they're using it to amplify the impact of the code, not just the output.
Correct. And I think just to complete the thought about the prompt-driven thing, they argue that code is now so cheap and fast to build on the fly this software for the situation. And what's the point in trying to fix and maintain an old code base? That's the proposition. And we've spent, and you've seen technical debt, right? We've seen so much invested in maintaining old models that actually probably aren't as suitable for the situation as you could spin up in real time right now. So I think it is worth, if you're not already on the journey with vibe coding, do go explore. It's an important innovation. Now, the combination of agents, agentic AI and vibe coding is actually transforming how the value works. And Joel just mentioned an example of it. But one of the things I see from going to lots of different meetups and hanging around at events is that thousands of first-time entrepreneurs are leaving really good jobs, the likes of Apple and Microsoft and AWS, and they're dropping out of Stanford and MIT, and they're doing it because it's so easy and cheap and fast to make their business dreams come true now. They can get a small team together and create something that gets to market and starts getting traction really cheap, really fast. Just an indicator of that is YC, the venture startup support. firm. They've dropped, on average, the YC teams have dropped from 6 people in 2022 to just 2 or 3 in 2024. There's a surge in solo founders as well. Look at our Introvert with AI down the bottom of that illustration, right? There is a surge in those. YC's not a big fan of those, to be fair, because they like someone to like you to have some support, right? But it's possible, and we are actually seeing not just young people doing this, but people with great experience learning, taking what they've learned from their business and going back with that idea to think, well, I can start building this company from scratch. I don't need the kind of big investment that used to be required, at least to get to that first step. So agents and vibe coding are ushering an era in which we're all potential founders. In fact, I've seen there are job losses happening here in the Valley too. And I've seen the argument made that you might as well go and build your own thing as sit in a company waiting to be made redundant. So the risk profile changes. If you can be in control of your future, the argument is that you now can be fairly simply. And the important thing, I think, for enterprises to understand is that we need to harness some of that in our own organizations. So if it's easier for me to build my business dreams outside the organization than within it, there's a problem. So we've got to reverse that. We've got to find ways of providing the tools to enable everyone in the organization to be able to create and direct and deploy their own agentic workforce to get the things done that they believe are important to the organization. You have to start thinking about how you can enable your people to be the human at the helm of their own AI operation, an end-to-end process. That's where I think we're heading, and that's where I think people will want from firms in order to stay with them, because frankly, if they're limited from doing the testing that they might do to be able to learn how these things work, they're going to be doing it on their own time anyway, and there will become a point when they're deciding, I need to do this somewhere else. I can't do this within the confines I have here. So I genuinely ask you to consider what's going on out in the Valley and beyond, frankly, and what you can take of that into your own organization to encourage that kind of one person leading an output in an organization with control over it and belief in it. Okay, I'm going to quickly, conscious we're about halfway through, and I'm about a little over halfway through. So we're doing okay. I want to leave time for questions, of course. But vertical AI, I'm just going to rush through this a little bit. Vertical AI, I think, is becoming very significant for enterprises, right? Because this is where AI becomes more pragmatic. It becomes an effective route to monetization as well. So this is where your deep expertise and your rich relationships play out in a deep context, and everyone's talking about context here in the Valley now, as making things work most effectively for your organization. So the idea of vertical AI is about designing to understand the messy and domain-specific stuff that goes on the workflows in hospitals or in a PE portfolio or in any kind of business. And firms such as Veltus, which we have a relationship, they were addressing vertical specific challenges as orchestrators of vertical AI solutions, and they're embedding industry-specific workflows, and all the focus is on maximizing ROI. So this becomes a very pragmatic way in which your domain expertise becomes front and center. And believe me, that's an advantage. Most of the Valley does not have this deep domain expertise in the industry or in functions of kind of things that enterprises know. So this is your advantage. The other thing I've seen very recently, in fact, I saw a company yesterday, and I came up with the term vertical context for them to describe what they were doing. They seemed very happy with that. There is the idea of context, you're seeing played out in Palantir, for example, is having these ontologies and understanding the semantics of not only the data points, but how the data has relationships. So understanding when I say customer, I mean customer in one context when I'm talking about a complaint, and one when I'm talking about a purchase order, right? That we instantly understand this. AI doesn't. It has to be given that context. And now we're seeing verticalization of that context into specific functions. The example I saw yesterday was about sales. So understanding your customers, your partners, your rivals, and your products, and getting all of the context of them to support support a growth center. This is another thing I'm seeing emerging. Support the growth center of revenue, driving revenue through sales. So increasingly, I see that as a theme. We're seeing companies here focusing on growth centers in order to focus on revenue. I mentioned earlier, they've worked out that actually what the boardroom wants is growth. So every time, look at solutions that are going to drive your growth more than are going to create just a little bit of efficiency here and there. That's where I think you'll start to see some significant breakthroughs. And talking of breakthroughs, let's move on to efficiency in a different framework. Right? And what we're talking about here is the race for better intelligence for watt per dollar. This is an increasingly important thing that we've seen emerging through 2025, but I think will accelerate in 2026. So this is the way in which you can get more bang for your buck, basically. I can spend less and get equivalent compute, or I can spend less and get a better energy efficiency. That's a real area of focus here among a number of companies I'm speaking to. There is an understanding that you can't just keep going on for an ever and ever for the brute force IQ and think that's great for every organization. Enterprises actually need kind of good enough, and then they need it efficient. Then they replicate. So what we saw across the last year, you may recall about a year ago, turn of the year, turn of 2025, DeepSeek came out with their R1 model. Now, I'd been in the Valley the month before that, and I was being told that no one would ever catch up with what was being done in the frontier models. There was a number of reasons why I felt that was true, but they felt that they had such a lead that no one was going to close this gap. And then all of a sudden, DeepSeek's R1 model came. And it did it by taking a much better approach to efficiency because it had to. They were constrained by capabilities. They couldn't just throw more and more GPUs at it. They had to find ways in which they could build a model efficiently. And that actually was interesting because then I read back on some of the work I'd done with Writer, who are in San Francisco. They had already done this. They'd done it in October, but nobody paid it too much attention because they were doing it for the enterprise. And it's not the sexiest consumer. And so DeepSeek got all the praise and the excitement, but Writer was quietly doing it anyway. What then happened was everyone in the Valley went, oh, we were going to do that anyway. And here's our new, more efficient models. And we saw a new focus on trying to not just go brute force IQ, but also let's see if we can make these things more compute efficient. In the last part of the year, I heard a lot more about reinforcement learning. That used to be something we talked a lot about with the machine learning world, but it's come back. It's being used to support reliable agentic systems. And again, that's about creating new ways of efficiency. I've seen firms, I think it's autonomy.compute, have a different model for how they organize the containers for agents, which makes them significantly more efficient. We're going to see more and more of these kind of improvements because the risk with agents is if you've got hundreds of them, they're mostly not running. They're mostly sitting there just burning compute. If you can find ways in which you can make that more efficient, so you've got them in more, thousands of them in one container, for example. Those are the kind of solutions that we're now seeing startups in the Valley focusing on because they understand we can't just keep throwing brute force at this. When at the turn of the year, this year, DeepSeek came back again. It seems to be like an annual festival for them. They come out and pull the rug. And this time it was manifold constrained hyperconnections. Now, I haven't heard a lot more about this in the last month or so, but I expect it. I think there will be other similar models. And I've seen others that take different approaches to learning. But can be much more tricky. But the MHC model combines both architecture and systems to increase the capacity of the model without having to ramp up its computer processing power. So that means you get greater intelligence per watt per dollar and less need for the high-end GPUs. So we'll see, I think, models built on that principle. And I'm hearing all the time people rewriting their code so that they will only run on CPUs, for example. So there's a constraint that they're setting themselves. What it means for the enterprise? Well, more choice. You're going to get an increasing diversity of vertical specialists who are training mid-sized foundational models that are going to be good enough for you, and they're going to be specific for you. Also, this efficiency is driving the downward pricing pressure. I told you earlier about how the cost of tokens has fallen 280 times in 18 months. Expect that drive to continue. But your access to good enough capability and sovereign options are more plausible by the day. Like I say, keep going back. Don't think that you checked something 6 months ago that that's the end of the story. Whatever you thought wasn't possible is probably much more likely to be possible around now, and certainly in the next 6 to 12 months. It also emphasizes the need to shift. If you're just locked into one single model, you really do need a portfolio approach. One single model is never going to be the best or the most efficient all of the time. So look for ways in which you can switch in and out. I mentioned the modular architectures earlier in this presentation. And one thing I think every enterprise CTO should now do is track efficiency in the way they've been tracking the capability of major model releases, because ideas like MHC and those that will follow are going to make significant impacts on the cost curve. Super board or take a break. Okay, physical AI, very exciting area. It's on the rise. What I mean by physical AI is where literally it's about physics. That's why it's called physical AI. It's not because it makes robots move around. It's because it's understanding how things move and interact in the real world. So it understands gravity and friction, that kind of thing, right? Because you can't actually make robots move around in the real world if they don't understand those things. We saw an explosion of it through some of the video models that were released. Were not about you playing around to make a cat. They were about learning how predicting the next pixel can work. That's what I think is going on with these consumer-facing video plays. So one of the things I think is really interesting, that chart on the right shows the rise in Hugging Face data sets for robotics. It's the fastest growing segment on there. It's gone from 1,000 to 27,000 just in 2025. Then you've got companies like Skilled coming along, which I think they raised something like, they raised something like 1.6 billion, sorry, 1.4 billion at a 14 billion valuation. And don't forget, folks, we call a unicorn a 1 billion valuation. So that's a hell of a unicorn. And they are building the brain for robots. And that's what the Valley is good at, actually. In order to make this leap to hardware, we're going to need real-world robot data. So we need to understand through video, through actions, sensors, and failures. And the Valley is doing very well on the data set stuff. China is making the hardware. You've seen our friend Elon converting his car factories to robot making. Some might say that's because he can't sell his cars anymore. But it's a response to the fact that China, if you're building any kind of humanoid robot here in the Valley, you are sourcing your parts from China. They control the supply chain. So there's a bit of a strategic reason for making more of those parts in the US. But researchers and startups and large players such as NVIDIA are now launching real-world robot data sets, building platforms for people to build on top of. And there's a rapidly growing maker community. I went to Boston Dynamics used to have a place here in the Valley. I don't think they're here anymore, but if they are, their old building is now basically a startup hub for robots. And it's an amazing place to go visit. I went one weekend because they had the promise of boxing robots, right? Who will mind go what's that? So the interesting thing about all of these robots is that they're not actually very autonomous at the moment, right? That's the reality. Let me just take you through our definition of physical AI right now. We, in line with our software as services model, we describe physical AI as software-led services embodied in physical systems. That could be robots, humanoids, vehicles, industrial equipment. And they should be able to perceive and decide and act in the real world, operating autonomously. And then delivering monetized and productized services on top of that, of course. But the reality is right now, if you go out and buy a Neo or an Eggy or one of Elon's new toys, they don't really even qualify as assisted physical AI yet. They're essentially human operated. Every demo I have seen so far in a space in which a bot has to interact with humans is controlled by another human because of the safety aspects, right? Now, in factories, that's a different space. You can secure the space where people won't wander into, and there is more autonomy, been there for decades, right? But the actual use in, let's say, a hospital is fairly constrained and fairly human controlled. Now, the reason they're doing that is not just to always have some sort of remote control robot. It's actually to grow the data sets that we're going to need to achieve physical AI. So that's going to be an exciting area because that is accelerating. As I showed on the previous slide, the number of data sets available is increasing all of the time. And we will see some breakthroughs, I think, in robotics this year that's worth paying close attention to, because in many ways, this is the greatest time save that we will experience. AI to date has been saving time on words, and AI in the future will be saving time on physical labor. And there's a lot more headroom in physical labor than there is in words.
David, I'm going to give you a time check. You got about 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think we might be okay. I'll just rush through AGI. AGI, exciting, of course, but not quite with us. So probably just a quick sense check of what we call AGI. So we say it's is self-directed intelligence that overcomes human cognitive limitations across all domains. So it can think and reason and learn like human in any domain. I have not seen a single case of that. Yet, I've seen one example where someone is training their or building their model to do exactly that. But let's see how that goes. The reason I want to look at AGI is just to make it a little bit more pragmatic for you. How it translates in the journey for the enterprise. So I think when we're talking about getting closer to AGI, what we actually mean is for an enterprise is the higher straight-through completion on real workflows, less human touching, less humans needing to fix things, lower oversight costs, so less review time, and better recovery. So you're handling tool failures, ambiguity and some data in a better way. And finally, safer autonomy. It's going to do less dumb stuff. Well, actually, we see it already do dumb stuff while answering. We definitely don't need it to do dumb stuff wrong. And the reason I put this little chart together is just to demonstrate, look, across all of the leading AI firms, there's if you use OpenAI's levels of AGI, they have 5 levels that goes on the left-hand side from chatbots through to organizational. And the organizations element is actually pretty much business unit as software. And so in that scenario, what we describe as AGI would therefore be end-to-end execution of a business unit. It sorts the strategy, the ops, the governance with minimal human management. Sounds a lot like services as software, right? And so that's business unit as software, I think, is where AGI is going to end up. The reason I've stuck that big purple blob on for open floor is I think it demonstrated to a lot of people pretty instantly how close we could get to them. Now you can set a task going and get an app. And now with the partnership with OpenAI, I'd expect that to be scaled and made more enterprise capable very quickly. I've seen in the last week the development of a thing called Introvert, which is run by folks who have a background in blockchain to try to bring that security element to open source that a lot of people have been afraid about. I've spoken to tech CEOs who have, apologies if you're hearing any noise in the background, it's the rain falling on my roof now. I'm in the middle of an interesting call. But the tech CEOs, they recognize in their own teams, and their own teams are saying, oh, this looks a bit dangerous, I'm a bit afraid of using it. I've heard of folk that go off and then spend their weekend in creating their own sandbox and building stuff for themselves with open door, customer-facing stuff, and then going back to their team on a Monday and saying, do you know what, let's give this a go. And so that kind of capturing of an end-to-end outcome is being delivered entirely by agents going to agents. I mentioned the Iron Thor launch, which is to bring some security for that. A couple of other interesting aspects. One is that they are building an agent-to-agent marketplace. So an agent can write an RFP effectively for other agents to pitch for, and then make the transaction in Bitcoin to get the work done. So you can actually access anyone's agents in the community to get work end-to-end done, and then negotiate amongst themselves and come up with the best solution. No humans involved there at all. Now, the guy, and he was one of the writers of that very famous paper, Attention is All You Need. The guy who was presenting this then added, oh yeah, and we might add humans as deliverers of outcomes in the real world, by which he meant you might be able to use an agent to go out and try to find a solution for you, and the end point of the solution might be a human being having to go and wash some windows, and they need a human being for that because they haven't got smart enough robots yet. So at the moment, we're the end product of agent-to-agent commerce. Could be coming. So interesting area. I don't think we're at AGI yet, but do not be surprised if we get to something like that kind of business unit as software definition within a fairly short time now. How are we going to cope with all this? I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly because I want to leave sufficient time for questions. But effectively, you've got to increase your pace of growth, and that comes from maturity governance. We've seen the default generally is to lock too much down in terms of action. So we end up repeating known processes. We do that a little faster with a few less humans. And in the recent HFS roundtable, where folk were talking about deploying AI widely for automation and for personalization, they were only seeing 1% growth on the top line. And I'm kind of not surprised, really, because if you lock down both what AI can create and what AI can do, I'm not surprised you're not going to get very much growth out of that. So my take on this is that we need to release a brake that's applied to the creative side of AI and start shifting from governing for automation to governing for innovation. And that paper reference there will give you our runway framework. I'm not going to go through this in detail now, but the important thing is we separate the cognitive layer from the actuation layer. So we allow it to do its thinking. The design principles, you keep the option space wide, but you encode constraints of policies, not a preset menu of drop-downs. These become policies that people can apply every time. And you can apply an autonomy ladder, you see it on the right-hand side, where you start by just letting it do assistance. So the more you set your rules and your policy gates, the faster you can progress up that autonomy ladder all the way to acting independently, but bounded and monitored in this runway proposition. The other element I think is really important, and I mentioned at the beginning, the rate of change is so fast that most companies are not keeping up with even trying it. So we need firms to be able to increase their access to innovation, to get all of this richness that's coming from the startup community without increasing your risk. So I think that's about matching needs to startup solutions. So enterprises might be identifying what they need. We may be able to help find those startup solutions. But then it's about streamlining your startup and onboarding processes and your risk policies to enable a faster entry into building capability in your organization. So we need new readiness playbooks. We need to be able to analyze the gap between where you are and where you need to be. Set yourself some targets on maturity scoring. Set yourselves a roadmap to actually make the change. And I think this happens by bringing people together, bringing startups together with enterprises, working together to identify what is it that is preventing you moving fast on bringing in a startup. What do startups need to change in order to be able to meet enterprise needs? Where's the space in the middle that's going to help both of them? I think that's an area we need to explore, and I think every company should be exploring that pretty rapidly. That's that speed trust gap I talked about. So enterprises moving too slow, you can test startups burning out before they achieve adoption. That's going to break the innovation supply chain. Really important we try to solve for this. So, very quickly, my takeaways. Tech drives the link to the next X curve, leading to services as software. Stay close to what's happening in the valley. It's now becoming business critical that you're really close to the rate of change. Get ready to build agent operating systems, not just agents. Take vibe coding seriously. Its software is becoming situational, not structural. AI is becoming more pragmatic and industry focused, so develop and operationalize verticalized AI with industry experienced partners. Track efficiency breakthroughs like you should major model release. Ideas like MHC and those that will follow are going to make a big impact on cost curves. Training data for physical AI is scaling rapidly, so expect breakthroughs shortly. And AGI is edging closer to delivering business units and software by the day. And OpenClaw is a warning of what's to come. If you haven't tried that, by the way, please do. Finally, update your governance to ingest innovation faster, and then you'll unleash AI for top line growth. Focus on the top line. That's my biggest tip for you. Okay, that's all I have. So I think we're over to questions. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. Joe, I think you're on mute, Colin.
Thank you very much, David. I think we only have really time for one question, but I've got two questions that I'm going to try my best to combine. Both of them have to do with enterprise adoption and basically the differences between how U.S. enterprises are adopting versus enterprises in the rest of the world, and then understanding a little bit about why these differences are happening, and then what challenges are you seeing? You kind of touched on a little bit in those last slides, the need for playbooks being one example. What challenges do you see, and what changes do enterprises need to really make to see the value of AI investment, as you've articulated the many paths over the last hour that they could possibly go down?
Yeah. So I think there's, and I can only really speak of the Valley, because actually there is a difference in how US firms are taking up AI. The biggest from the deepest pockets that have been on digital transformation journeys successfully, they are the most likely. They've already developed the muscle memory of transformation of this scale and kind. I think the shift I'm seeing is, or maybe there's two routes into this. One is that there is a focus on the vertical aspect, the solving a particular problem, and increasingly solving a particular problem for a growth center in an organization. That's where I think land and expand happens from. Right? So if you're an enterprise leader, and particularly you're in a growth function, what are your problems? How can AI solve them? Look at it from that perspective and focus it on what you're going to grow in terms of revenue as an outcome. That will drive you, I think, a lot of the other things that I've talked about. A lot of the need to improve the speed at which you can bring innovation into the organization. Otherwise, that's a huge blocker. A lot of the changes in how governance has to happen. Otherwise, all you're going to do is govern yourself to a standstill again, and no growth. Right, so those, I think, are the two biggest changes that you can make. And some would argue you might as well go all in. If you're going to make those changes anyway, particularly on the governance side, then you may as well look at it as AI as an operating system across the organization. Now, the problem is that that's a really big ask to make of most organizations. So this is like, you now need to become digital. It's that kind of scale of change. Perhaps more so because I think there's even more rapid organizational change. If you look at how we're going to work with agents, for example, there's a lot of cultural change to consider. So there's a reason why people don't leap at that unless they've already got experience of going down that route and they're already seeing value from it. So the other focus is just look to where I can deliver growth. Learn from that experience and then use that as a way in which adjacent parts of the organization will also say there's value here. You get 2 or 3 of those going, it's going to bubble up to CEO saying, we need to do this at scale. You mentioned the difference between Europe and US, or the US and the rest of the world. There is, and I'll just say that there's some geopolitical weirdness going on where for the first time in my life, I've seen European companies, at least, considering very carefully their use of US technology. You see that a lot in France, led by the French government. And then you see things like the India AI Summit this week, which is interesting because I see India as this bridge between China and the West. Right? So India might become a very powerful interloper and broker in this space. And you can see, again, some real upside for some of the India-based GSIs from being able to take a position in the middle.
One last question. This Raj is still on the line. Raj asked, great insights, really appreciated it. If you go back to your slide 16, you talk about Introvert with AI. And so why is this locked into Silicon Valley? Isn't the argument there that you're making that this could happen with one person pretty much anywhere in the world with access to these tools?
It's completely what I'm saying. Yeah. And what you could be looking at to deliver in your organizations. So anyone can now be the head of an entire process. Anyone can be CEO of a process. You just have to have a team of agents, right? And in order to get to that, firms have to go, yeah, it's okay for people to experiment. It's okay for people to test and access data, etc. Who has the sandbox to, or who has the capability to go and set up a sandbox on AWS at the weekend? The CEO and a few chosen people, right? If you make that available to everyone, imagine the scale of capability that happens in the organization rapidly. So yeah, absolutely, this is about scaling the capability for individuals. That's what AI, that's the promise of AI. This is AI augmentation. This is not replacing humans. I think it's really dark. I think it's a lack of imagination when people talk about cutting heads, because each of those heads now becomes a center of growth if you enable them with sufficient technology, with the tools that are available to us. And so what you're doing by cutting heads is cutting your capability to grow.
Great. That's about all the time we have. There were a couple other questions, David, that you and I can follow up directly with folks. Everyone, sure. I really appreciate your time here. If you have a question after this, if you take time to think about it and you want to get back to it, you can reach me at joel.martin@hfsresearch.com or david.cushman@hfsresearch.com. We'll do our best to respond to you. Thank you very much. The material will be available. Yes.
I just want to add one thing. I'm still in the Valley, hanging around here for quite some time. I'm posting a lot on LinkedIn of what I'm learning every day. So if you want to keep up to date, follow me on LinkedIn.
Sounds great. And if they're in the Valley, they can reach out and hopefully meet up with you for a cup of tea or a coffee. Yeah. Awesome.
Coffee, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for attending.